Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
It's going okay. I'm more optimistic about certain elements of the 2020 college football season than I was the last time we spoke, and less optimistic about others. Not feeling great about our chances of a trip to Oregon this fall, just you and I, personally.
Yeah, and for good reason that you don't feel great about those possibilities, Tom, because I'm not sure if you saw this, but those possibilities were eliminated on Thursday when the Big Ten said, hey, Tom, no Oregon trip for you. No non-conference games in all of the fall sports. And so that's where we are, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And Tom, I know a lot of people feel like this is a step towards no football. And while that is probably technically true, it is also a step towards trying to make sure there is football. And I know that may sound counterintuitive, but I guess maybe you have to take the first couple of steps in the same direction before you can branch off towards trying to make this season happen. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I think this is reflective of the reality, which is it was going to be extremely difficult to have people traveling cross-country and playing every week without extra time off built in to reflect the realities of what this fall could look like for players and teams. So it's not, this is not great news, but I think it's reflective of the fact that they really, really, really want to make sure there is at least some kind of college football season this fall, and that they're trying to prioritize certain things, trying to at least have a somewhat normal-ish looking Big Ten schedule where you have some kind of a representative sample of Big Ten games that you can get in, and even if guys are, if some guys are testing positive, you can have something that sort of looks like a Big Ten football schedule, just on a very different timeline than you normally would.
Yeah, and they're even talking about adding a 10th conference game. That would be Gene Smith's preference, and it sounded like that was the conference's preference, and they'll get into that more next week. But that gives you, and with the inclusion, with the availability of week 0 now, which as Gene Smith said is available to Ohio State, or to the Big Ten, and week 0 being the week before the September 5th, quote-unquote, opening weekend. So there are a few, that's like the kickoff classic type weekend, where there's, a few games that kick off that weekend, the week before the actual first season. That has now been open to the Big Ten. So in theory, you could have 14 weeks to play 10 games. And if you wanted, you could go ahead and schedule a bye week after every 2 games. Now, I doubt that they will do that because you don't want everybody off at the same time. But having those 14 weeks for 10 games, it was all about flexibility. And I saw so many people on Twitter saying, how is it safer to cancel a game against Bowling Green, but to keep a game against like Nebraska? And trying to put this in terms of a geographical sense. And it wasn't so much that, it was just more about keeping things in-house with the Big Ten. It makes things much more easy to flip teams, flip games, flip weeks. You can't do that when you're dealing with 8 to 10 other conferences. And so by eliminating those non-conference games, now you're just in-house and you can remain as flexible as possible. But Tom, 14 weeks, 10 games, allowing for some pausing or, shifting a venue by a week. It sounds plausible, sounds possible. And the fact that this is the direction they're going, it would be nice to get to probable at some point.
Well, you're going to get to probable at some point. You're going to get to either probable or, this is really in trouble, probably sometime by about early to mid-August. they're expected to announce the schedule. It sounded like Gene Smith was anticipating they would have sort of a preliminary schedule out within the next few days, maybe a week. And then, you just got to see from there how things sort of shake out. I mean, this is obviously a situation that's changing quite a bit just on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis, let alone a month-to-month basis. I mean, it seems like every day Ohio's putting out a new map with things are bad here. Oh, they're less bad here now. Oh, now they're bad again here. And, that's something that, what is that map going to look like in a month? Like, that's absolutely impossible to know, just based on how quickly things are changing and, what new restrictions are going to get put into place, how many people are going to follow those restrictions. I mean, there's a million variables here that we don't know. But, I think my biggest takeaway from all of this was they are doing everything they can to have a season. And that's what Gene Smith said. Like, they really want to have a season for the players, because you have guys who came back. I mean, guys like Shaun Wade turned down NFL money to come back this year to play another season. You've got Justin Fields. This will probably be Justin Fields' last year as a Buckeye. You've got guys like Wyatt Davis. This is potentially his last year as a Buckeye. You've got all the seniors on the team who want to have one more year of being Buckeyes. Guys like Justin Hilliard, who have fought back for years and years and years from a million injuries, and now potentially in a place where he could finally be a starter on this defense. Like, you think Justin Hilliard wants to play this fall? I bet he does. C.J. Saunders, he's petitioned for a 6th year. You think C.J. Saunders wants to play this year? I bet he does. So you want to do it for the players. There's also a financial element of this, where if there is not a college football season after no NCAA tournament, there are going to be an awful lot of athletic departments around the country that are in big, big, big trouble financially. So, I think everyone is incentivized here to have a college football season. I think obviously fans want some kind of a college football season. So that in and of itself should give you some reason for optimism that they are going to do everything in their power to play this in a safe way. They don't want to, they're not just going to throw guys out there if there's, significant danger, if they can't kind of control this to the degree they can control it. But I think that should give you some sense for optimism that everyone is sort of on the same page here. Everyone wants a season. They just want to find a way to do it safely. And this is potentially a significant step towards finding a way to do it as safely as they can.
Yeah, and just listening to Gene Smith's tone on Thursday, he did not sound super enthused. And he had mentioned the last time he talked to us, which may have been May, he was cautiously optimistic. And remember at that time, he said, around 22,000 people in the stands. And so we reported that. He's like, hey, it could be as many as 50. Keep that in mind. We're looking into 50 as well. And now he's come back and the cautious optimism has left him based on, as you said, Tom, the trending in not good colors. It's getting redder and redder, and we know that's not great. And so the optimism is gone, and now you're just trying to put this together in a way that will work. And we'll find out more in terms of, because he was asked, like, how many players need to test positive before something is shut down, and they haven't discussed that yet, and they'll get with their medical people and determine those kind of parameters. That's not happened yet. I imagine their days and weeks are just meeting after meeting about all of these different things that you don't even think about. And next week it'll get into setting the schedule, because right now, for the teams playing week 0, they are able to have their mandatory workouts this week. Ohio State and most everyone else was scheduled to start those next week. Now, missing a week of workouts isn't really going to keep the Big Ten from adding week 0 games. It's just a few days of lost weightlifting and running, and that's not a huge thing when we're looking at the big picture of just wanting to play some football. And he was asked about playoffs, and that's when he started talking about, like, his focus right now is on Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis being able to have a regular season. That's all he's worried about, is making the regular season happen. And as you listen to him, and as you're part of this call, you're like, who cares about a postseason right now? you're holding on for dear life that there can be a regular season. And that's seemingly what they're doing right now. They're just trying to survive. They're not worried about taking a picture after the finish line looking all good with their hair done. It's like they're just trying to finish the race in any manner they can. And so that's where his mindset is right now. They'll talk about the postseason and all of that stuff next week, but right now where they are, it was, I don't want to say it was depressing, but it wasn't encouraging. But then again, as we've been saying, they are still trying to move forward, and they are willing to play, Tom, knowing that there's been an outbreak for 2 weeks, we're going to shut down. And then we'll just start in 3 weeks and 4 weeks because we've allowed ourselves that. So that is encouraging that they're putting that in place. And I wrote about it today. It kind of, I call it like the runaway semi-truck ramps on mountainsides. And they've built some of those in. So if things start getting out of control, just go right up that ramp and let's just sit for a bit and come back in 3 weeks and try to get things going again.
Well, yeah, this goes back to our last show where we were talking about the fact that they shut it down. And from all indications, from all of the sources that everyone on our staff has, it is a relatively small number of people in the building that had any kind of issues. And they're shutting it down out of purely precautionary measures and just trying to, that sounded like that was a truck coming downhill and it hadn't lost its brakes. It was just like, yeah, it's going a little too fast. You know what? Let's just be extra safe and pull it onto that ramp. It probably would be fine, but we don't want to take any chance that this gets away from us at this point of the process. If you have any questions at all, pull off to the side of the road when you're still near the top of the mountain before you're barreling downhill and you hit the real oh crap point. They don't want to get to the oh crap point because they really, really do want to get to a season. So, yeah, I think they are trying to balance here the need and desire for a season, and also the fact that they know this is potentially something that could be very serious. And I feel like we just need to repeat this every time we have this conversation. Yes, individual student athletes are not very likely to die from this virus. They are not super likely to have significant complications from this virus, but it's possible they could. And also, there are plenty of people in that building and plenty of people within the social circles of these players who do have potential comorbidities, are in elevated risk groups. Just because it is a bunch of 18 to 21-year-old players on the field during the games does not mean those are the only people who are at risk if they do this. So they are trying to be extra, extra, extra careful with that. And, again, every year you see those tear-jerking Tom Rinaldi stories about the college football player that has cancer or just found out he has cancer, or, heart conditions or any of that kind of stuff. And there may be someone in that building or in the building at Illinois or at Michigan or at Penn State who has something like that going on right now and does not know it. So they have to be a little bit careful because they don't want to, they want to balance the desire for a season with the fact that they want to try and keep people as safe as possible, because this is not quite as clean and neat as everyone wants to pretend it is on social media when they're just, when they want things to be the way they want them to be. That is not, if you have not yet figured out that 2020 is not going to work exactly the way you want to, I don't know how many more months of 2020 you need to figure that out, but that should be sinking in right now. So that is, as the leadership of the athletic department, the leadership of the university, the leadership of the conference, they have to balance what they want to have the season look like, which is, yes, we'd like there to be a college football season, with they cannot YOLO it. They cannot have the truck at the top of the hill and go, yeah, I mean, it'll probably be fine. Because then you get halfway down the mountain and realize there's a problem. So they're just trying to balance those two things. And, this not playing Bowling Green, not playing Buffalo, not playing Oregon, if that saves the rest of the season, then that was well worth that small sacrifice for the bigger picture, greater good.
And I think we talked about that even this week, preparing for this announcement to come, that if it meant that we could have 9 or 10 other games, then yeah, we can cut off these 2 or 3 games and move on. Gene was asked what has to happen to get to a point where he feels like sports can be played. And he said, they will continue to follow the lead of their medical experts. And then here's the quote. Obviously, we need the virus managed differently than it is now because we're on a spike again. And you can say what you want about these spikes and everything like that, but it's clear that a lot of the decision makers are taking those things seriously. So we've seen Ryan Day asking people, please wear a mask. Gene Smith, please wear a mask. Everybody asking fans to wear masks so that we can have college football. And, we'll see if it happens. The tone of the call was not great, just with Gene's demeanor on the way things are trending. But Tom, let's talk about who that 10th team might be, because I went and looked, and you would assume it would be a Big Ten West team because they're playing all of the other Big Ten East teams, unless they want to throw a second game against a Big Ten East opponent, which we can get into in a second here. But they're already playing Illinois, Nebraska, and Iowa this year. So throw those 3 teams out. They go to Minnesota next year. And so I wouldn't expect, and it would likely be a road game that they add in theory because they are already playing 5 home games in conference. So you would assume they would add a road game. With Ohio State opening at Minnesota next year, I'd say the Gophers are out. I think what I came down to was the most likely would be at Purdue or at Wisconsin, based on the fact that Purdue is at Ohio State next year, and Wisconsin was at Ohio State last year. So there is some uniformity there. There's some return games type of thing there. How do you feel about a Wisconsin or a Purdue? Because and the other thing Gene Smith said, he's like, schools, teams need to forget about competitive equity right now. You may not like the schedule that you get, but just be happy that you get a schedule. So maybe I'm trying to make this a logical pick, but logic may not have anything to do with just putting a 10th team on the schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is definitely a season where you can just throw logic out the window. You can throw competitive equity out the window. You can throw any kind of consideration about 2021 potentially out the window. Like it's all very logical that those would maybe be the 2 teams that Ohio State would go play because they just had them at home last year. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But, if for example, Rutgers, we talked about this earlier in the week, Rutgers has basically said they're going to do very limited, if any, on-campus instruction. So will Rutgers even be able to play football this year? We don't know. It's possible that Rutgers doesn't play football this year, for example. So if they don't play football, okay, well then you have another opening on the schedule, and maybe you're playing someone twice. I mean, that's been something that's sort of been floated in a couple places, that, hey, you may play a home and home with Indiana or a home and home with Michigan or something like that, rather than traveling to, say, for example, Minnesota or Iowa coming to Columbus, where they have to probably get on an airplane. They may not do that. I mean, I think it's probably too soon to make real specific guesses on this stuff. But, just the fact that the Big Ten Gene Smith has just flat out said that they are getting rid of, or they're not really as concerned about, equitable scheduling or, like real fair, even scheduling. I talked to the gentleman who does the scheduling for the Big Ten back in January for a story I wrote when I was running at the Ozone. And boy, does that conversation feel like a million years ago. But that was in the context of, hey, the Big Ten has already scheduled all its conferences games out until like 2024 or 2025. The ACC and the SEC only do it like a year or 2 out. And, the Big Ten just seems almost like random how, Ohio State plays Penn State in September when they play in Beaver Stadium, but it's always in November in Columbus, and so you never get night games in Columbus, but it's always a night game at Beaver Stadium. And what how do these schedules get made? And he was very nice. I talked to him had a really nice conversation with him, and very forthright. And he said basically it is just they have certain parameters that every year Indiana and Purdue have to play cross division, and they have certain things that Michigan and Michigan State don't want to play week 1 of the conference schedule. So they just have like a few individual little things that they plug in, and then they take everything else and plug it into a computer, and it spits out basically it's essentially a randomized schedule. There's certain games that, yes, Ohio State's going to play Michigan the last week of the season every year. Like there's certain games like that are kind of locked in. But outside of those few parameters, it basically spits out a randomized schedule where you're going to play your in-division teams, home 1 year, away the next year, home 1 year, away the next year. You're going to play each of the cross-division teams once every 3 years. But other than that, it's completely almost random. And that's just purely out of the interest of fairness. Now, that compared to how the SEC does it, it probably does put Big Ten teams at a little bit of a competitive disadvantage because the SEC is a little bit more strategic and they don't, stack. They will make sure that Alabama is not playing LSU and Auburn and Texas A&M and Georgia in consecutive weeks. The Big Ten last year, Ohio State obviously ended with Penn State at Michigan and then Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. So that was sort of the genesis of the story was like, hey, Ohio State seems like they got kind of a crappy schedule this year, and there's a couple of years coming up when Ohio State has similar kind of schedules, and Michigan has one, and Penn State has them a couple times, I think. How did that come to be? And the overarching theme of the Big Ten scheduling philosophy is fairness and just, they don't want to show favoritism towards anyone. They just want to have it basically is left up to the computer. And, if people have huge problems with it, they can run it, they can change it and run it through the computer again and get a second version of it spit back out to Adam. And then they can take that to the Board of Governors to get approved. But it is like equity and equality in scheduling is like the number one overarching principle for the Big Ten in scheduling football games. So the fact that that's kind of being set aside this year as a look, this is just, this is, yes, this is literally how we what we prioritize every year in doing this. We're going to have to set that aside this year and just kind of make it work. That should tell you that this is, anything but a normal year. And it's just basically, they're just going to find a way to make it work. And if Ohio State ends up with a substantially harder schedule than Michigan, or Penn State ends up with a substantially harder schedule than Ohio State, sorry, man, this is this year. You'll just have to deal with it. That's just how it is.
On Thursday or Wednesday, I think it was Thursday, I put out on Twitter, I put a poll out asking Buckeye fans if there's a 10th conference game added, who do you want it to be? And I threw in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Purdue, or Michigan as the season opener. I don't really know how I feel about the thought of playing Michigan twice. I can probably go either way on it. It's my favorite thing in the world, so why would you not want it more than once? But it's also my favorite thing in the world because it happens just once, I think, and it's in a certain place and has meaning. I think the Buckeye fans were kind of thinking the way I was because Michigan season opener finished 4th in that poll. It might not surprise you that at Purdue or playing Purdue was the finished 3rd. No Buckeye fans want to deal with Purdue right now. That the hurt is still too fresh. The Minnesota was 32%. That was the number one. It was all pretty even. But Tom, where are you on playing Michigan twice? Are you like all in? Is this something you'd have to? Because I don't know how I really truly feel, but I would certainly take it rather than not. Like right now, if it's Michigan twice or Michigan none, yeah, give it to me twice.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, if you tell me it's going to be, all right, they're going to play Indiana 3 times, Maryland twice, Rutgers twice, and Michigan twice. Like, yep, that's fine. That is, 9 games? Sure. Let's do that. That's fine. Whatever they have to do, that's fine. Let's play those. If they play Michigan twice this year, sure. I mean, this is... I'm fine with it. I'm not necessarily saying like this would be the greatest thing in the history of the world if it just turns into like a 7-game series between Ohio State and Michigan. I don't think that's going to happen, but it would be. This is just going to be a weird year. This is just in hockey. This is a weird year. They've expanded the playoffs and cut the regular season short. In baseball, you're only playing your division. You're only playing, your division and then the opposite leagues teams in your same division. So the NL East is playing the NL East and the AL East. The NL Central is playing the NL Central teams and the AL Central and so on. Like, it's just, this is going to be a weird year. This is like almost one of those like non-canon, like side story things in like a comic book series or, sci-fi series or whatever. Like, this is, this is a Treehouse of Horror episode of The Simpsons. Like, just because the family turned inside out does not mean that that's going to have any impact on the episode next year. Like, this is just like a non-canon episode, and you'll just have to enjoy it for what it is. So, yeah, I mean, if Ohio State plays Michigan twice, that means Ohio State is playing 2 extremely meaningful football games this fall that we potentially get to cover in some form. So yeah, I'm all for it. And if they play just their division teams and play 3 of them twice or 4 of them twice, like, yeah, that's fine. Whatever it takes, let's have a season and let's have football to watch, and let's do it in as safe a way as we possibly can.
Will it still have the same meaning? And I'm not just saying Michigan twice. I mean, this season, will it still feel the same? Will it still mean as much? Will everything have an asterisk by it? Will any type of postseason, like, because I'm wondering, like, will every game feel like an exhibition game in the NFL, like a preseason game? And I don't think it will, because you'll have starters out there for the entire time. But I just wonder if we will see if the players will be able to engage in the same way they would in a normal year. And maybe that's how we'll know that things are real, is that we'll take their lead, and fans will take their lead, and they may not even be in the stadium, but we'll have to see if they take it as seriously, and they should. But I just wonder, with all of the changes and eliminating things, and it's going to be different. So you wonder, how different will the players treat it? If they treat it like everything is, like they treat everything, then that would be great. I wonder if they'll do that, or what percentage can do that and what percentage can't.
I kind of feel like this is going to get treated, at least in the world at large, not like an NFL exhibition season, but like the NFL strike year of 1987, where it's kind of like, yeah, some weird stuff happened at the beginning of the year, and this was definitely not a normal year. Or the baseball strike season of 1981, the baseball strike season of 1994, and like the baseball season this year. Like, it's 60 games. Everyone has just sort of, I think, agreed, like, this is going to be a season when a bunch of weird small sample size stuff happens, and this is going to, when you are looking at Baseball Reference 10 years from now, you're going to look back and go, hey, wow, how did, Joey Votto only hit 250 that year? It's like, well, it's a weird small sample size season, and that was 2020, so you just kind of have to throw that out to some degree. But, at the same time, I don't think Ohio State's going to have trouble getting up for Michigan twice. This just seems like a year where, if you have a bunch of like weird games, you're playing a home and home with Indiana, for example. Like, how excited is Ohio State going to be if they beat Indiana at home 49-7? How excited are they going to be to go to Bloomington? And how much can Ohio State coaches convince the players, like, well, this is still a team you need to take seriously, even though you beat them by 6 touchdowns 3 weeks ago. This is a year when, like, the trip to Purdue 2 years ago, where it was just like Ohio State was just sleepwalking and just got clobbered. Like, I think you're going to see, the weirder the schedule gets this year, I think the more you're going to see stuff like that happen. And that doesn't necessarily mean Ohio State goes into Indiana and loses by 30 points, but you're going to have some weird stuff. If Maryland plays Penn State twice, Maryland might beat Penn State once. Like, just something weird like that. And I mean, this goes to a conversation you and I had on Twitter on Thursday night, which was, this has the potential to be, I mean, college football is, I say this with the most love I could possibly muster. College football is the weirdest, dumbest sport in the world. Like, you have just the absolute craziest crap that happens in a normal year. You have these insane upsets of teams that are favored by 30 points and lose. You have, Ohio State has a third-string quarterback and covers the point spread of a Big Ten championship game by 62 points or something like that. I mean, just like, you have this just weird stuff that happens because it is a sport played by 18 to 21-year-old males who sometimes have focus issues, sometimes are not doing, sometimes just they go out and go to a party instead of getting the sleep they're supposed to, and sometimes they're not taking things seriously when they need to, and like these things happen, and you can't get guys up, really fired up to play every single game. That they're up for the Michigan game every year, but sometimes they're just, it's at Iowa. What's the worst thing that can happen? So I think you're going to have, if anything, you're going to have a lot more of that this season, where, maybe this is the year that Pittsburgh beats Clemson. Maybe this is the year that Alabama goes into, Alabama loses to Tennessee. I don't know where that game is this year. Tennessee catches Alabama this year. Oregon. I mean, I think the last time we did a show, we talked about Oregon potentially losing to North Dakota State. Like that game probably may not happen now, but if it does, Oregon could lose to someone silly. Like, you're going to have teams that you would normally have absolutely no business losing to. You're going to see teams losing those games because you'll have weird focus issues. You'll have, hey, the starting quarterback's out with COVID this week. Whatever it is, like, in an already crazy and unpredictable sport, the unpredictability is going to get cranked up about 50% again this year. So, yeah, I know this is going to be a weird year. I think you just kind of have to go in with the mindset like, hey, we are just going to enjoy every single minute of this and just appreciate the absolute utter insanity that is coming for what it is. Like, just college football is gloriously, gloriously stupid in so many ways. Just appreciate that. Just bask in it. And, if Boston College wins the ACC this year, you know what? Great. That's awesome. That is fun. It is unexpected. One of the biggest criticisms of college football is that on a macro level, it's too predictable, and it's like the same 5 teams win the national championship every year. Well, maybe this is the year that some real crazy stuff happens to some of those teams.
But if Michigan wins it all, then yes, asterisk.
Well, I mean, as we said, it's a non-canonical year, so no. If anything would be proof that this is not a real season, Michigan winning the national championship.
Or a Big Ten championship.
Well, obviously.
Real quick on the non-conference opponents for Ohio State that have been canceled. Gene Smith said that he'll talk with Oregon about, because this puts next year in doubt as well. And so they'll have to decide what they're going to do with that. So this may impact next year's schedule as well. He hasn't talked to the ADs at BG and Buffalo yet exactly about any type of compensation, I guess. And he said there would be talks about that, which leads me to believe they won't get nothing. But I'm looking here at a tweet from Jordan Strack, who's a sports director at Channel 11 in Toledo, saying the BG was scheduled to play at Ohio State and at Illinois, which would have provided BG with $2.2 million that they're not going to get, which is huge and it's devastating. And I'm sure probably 60 or 70% of that maybe was coming from Ohio State. But Ohio State has to worry about Ohio State. Illinois has to worry about Ohio State, or Illinois has to worry about Illinois. Ohio State could end up, if they were to bring in Bowling Green, they may not make any money from that because they're not going to make their $5 to $7 million from the gate, and they may only make a couple million from that, and then it just goes right to Bowling Green. So there's no really incentive for Ohio State to do that. That's unfortunate for Bowling Green and all of the MAC teams and all of the group of 5 and all of those schools. Yeah, it sucks, but 2020 as a whole has sucked for a lot of people, and we've seen sports cut. We've seen coaches take pay cuts, those poor coaches. But Gene Smith did say that right now there are no plans to cut any sports at Ohio State. There are no plans to cut any coaching salaries. That's part of the upside of being in the Big Ten and being Ohio State, as opposed to being in the Pac-12, where you don't really have the same television revenue. So that's where Ohio State's just wanted to update on the schedule for next year and beyond, and what they're going to do for BG and Buffalo. Maybe something, maybe nothing, but certainly not what they were going to do, I would think. Tom, you got anything else before we call this a day?
No, I think my biggest overarching takeaway from this is don't feel super optimistic right now, but also don't get too down. I think a lot of stuff is going to change between now and September, which seems like probably the least controversial thing we have said all show. So just, I think you should in some ways feel more encouraged with where things are, just based on the hoops they are trying to jump through to make sure you get some kind of a college football season. And they are not necessarily doing that specifically for you as a viewer, but if they are doing it for the reasons they are doing it, whether it's for the players or for the money or whatever else, doesn't matter. That means you will potentially get a college football season, which is in this year when virtually nothing is guaranteed. The fact that the folks in charge are doing what they can to make sure there is the best possible chance that it happens, that's about as good as it's going to get right now, I think.
Yeah, and the fact that you could have teams who aren't fully aware of their schedule until like 2 weeks out of a game as things get shifted around. And Gene Smith even talked about just pre-scheduling a portion of the schedule and then figuring it out as they go, which, like you said, Tom, they are jumping through as many hoops as they can to get this done safely. So that is encouraging. And hopefully that continues to the point where now there are no longer any hoops. We're just going to play. And hopefully that happens and we will see down the road. But Ohio State workouts should begin next week at some point, as long as everything gets cleaned and they get to feeling good about starting. And so that will happen with the mandatory workouts, I assume, next week. So I want to thank you all for listening. Make sure to check out everything at Buckeye Scoop right now. We've got Bill Green had his chat on Thursday. You can go through and read that on the Ask the Insiders board. There's always tons of info there to pick up, and it's a lot of people say it's worth the subscription rate all on its own, and that's not me saying that. That's me repeating what other people have said. And of course, Tom's got the morning scoop Monday through Fridays with all sorts of different guests. Been no shortage of topics of late, Tom.
Yes, the normally boring June has been anything but boring this year. We've had several times we've had to reschedule or redo podcasts this week because, hey, the world has completely changed in the 3 hours since we recorded the episode last. So, yeah, this has been, it hasn't necessarily been the best week of college football in history, but it has been a more eventful week than we typically have this time of year.
Yeah, so we do want to thank you all for listening to all of the podcasts on this network and as well for reading Buckeye Scoop. So thank you all for listening and have a great day.